We are The Point, a church that loves God, loves people, and loves life. If you are interested in learning more about us, please go to our website, thepointva.com. Thanks for listening.
Good morning. It is amazing to be with you guys again. We consider you part of the World Help family, and we are just so excited to be able to partner with you in that way, and I can't wait to share more with you. I have a confession to make. I told the earlier service, I completely forgot about daylight savings time. Does anybody else want to admit that? Thank heavens for iPhones, probably why you guys are here at the 11 o'clock service, right? But I was sort of honored that Pastor Gabe wanted me to come speak again, and then I was like, I'm probably the only one who agreed to come on the morning of daylight savings. But anyways, so happy to be here. You guys are literally impacting the world. Places like Guatemala, Cuba, Peru, the Middle East, Haiti, and Puerto Rico. You've sent clean water and life-saving aid. You've helped refugees. You've rescued children. You are transforming entire villages. And the number of people you have impacted around the world, it's mind-blowing. But I don't want to just tell you. I want you to see how you're impacting the world. Watch this with me. Absolutely amazing. And don't miss that number towards the end of the video, nearly 9,000 lives. Absolutely incredible. I can't thank you enough, but I know that you don't do it so that I will come say thank you or to receive any kind of recognition. You do it because you believe, like we believe, in being the hands and feet of Jesus on the ground to people in need here in your own community and around the world. And I know my dad wishes he could be here this morning too. Many of you know my dad, Vernon Brewer. He's the founder of World Help. And my dad and I have traveled together for years. I started traveling with him when I was 11 years old. It was the best gift he could have ever given me because my dad didn't just tell me how to live, he showed me. And he took me on the journey with him, and his passion quickly became my passion, and I'm forever grateful for that gift that he gave me. But a few years back, we were traveling together. We were just at a conference, and after the conference, we were going two separate ways. So at the airport, we split up. And I found myself at the airport early in the morning in probably the longest security line ever. This is before I had TSA PreCheck. It's probably the reason I ended up getting TSA PreCheck, but it was so long, I literally thought I was gonna miss my flight. I was tired. By the time I got up to the front of the line, I threw my bag up on the conveyor belt, walked through the other side, tapping my foot, waiting for my bag to come through. And I waited and waited. It didn't come through. And I finally look up to see the TSA agent looking at the screen and realize he's staring at my bag. I'm like, great. So he comes over, he says, ma'am, would you mind if we pulled your bag to the side and opened it up and take a look? Well, if you've traveled, this happens frequently. It's not that big of a deal, but I was tired, it was early, and these words proceeded to come out of my mouth. Sure, I just hope it doesn't explode. And I said it loud enough for everybody around me to hear. Thank heavens I had the nicest TSA agent. He simply looked at me and said, shh. Well, at that point, it registered what I had done, and I became like the crazy lady. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That is not what I meant. I just meant I packed in such a hurry this morning, and I shoved all my clothes, and I just thought they would come flying out. So long story short, he pulls me over to the side, and then he says, ma'am, do you realize there is a bullet casing in your suitcase? Now keep in mind, it's the same lady who just said her bag was gonna explode, and now he tells me there's a bullet in my suitcase, and all these things are going through my mind at the same time. How is this bullet in my suitcase? Some of you maybe remember last year, my husband was here, but he's a judge, a circuit court judge here in the state of Virginia. I'm like, how am I gonna call my husband and tell him I'm at jail and can't get home? And then I'm just thinking, how did a bullet get in my suitcase? Some of you have been to Guatemala with us, and when you travel to Guatemala, they tend to throw your bags up on top of this truck, and you're driving all over the place, remote areas. I'm like, did somebody shoot at my suitcase? I don't know. The TSA agent proceeds to open my suitcase, reaches his hand in like he knows exactly where he's going, and hits my jewelry pouch of all things, pulls out my jewelry pouch and pulls out this necklace. This necklace that I thought was so cute that I had bought at a little like local shop back home, a handmade necklace, and the girl who made the necklace thought it would be really cute if she attached the little charm on the end of the necklace with a bullet casing. Yes. Long story short, I survived. I got out of the airport, did not go to jail, got back home, and never traveled with that necklace again. But here's where I'm going. I'm a seasoned traveler. I have traveled since I was 11 years old. I know the do's and don'ts of travel. I know what you're supposed to do when you go through a security line, what you're not supposed to do, the things you're supposed to say, and the things you are not supposed to say. But in that moment, in the chaos of that moment, the early mornings, I forgot the basics. I forgot the fundamentals. And that's really what I want to talk to you about this morning. You see, last year I decided to take up something new. I decided that I wanted to learn how to box. I wanted to start boxing. Now, you need to know I'm not an athlete, never have been. I do like to work out, I like to do CrossFit things, but I'm not an athlete. Growing up, I was a cheerleader, and no offense to anyone, but this was way before cheerleading was considered a real sport. So I am not an athlete. But I decided I wanted to take a couple boxing lessons. So the first thing I did, because this is the most important thing when you take up a sport, is you get the right gear, right? You have to look the part. Like when I decided I wanted to play golf, I was more concerned with the golf clothes and the cute covers on my clubs. When I took tennis, it was all about the tennis skirt. So when I took up boxing, you won't be surprised that I got bright pink boxing gloves, right? I mean, if you're gonna do it, then do it right? Okay, so here's the thing. I've learned a little bit about boxing, and when I say a little bit, I mean just a little bit. I've learned the basics. I've learned a few moves, and I wanna share some of those with you this morning. So, what I learned is, to begin with, is the two basic, fundamental, first punches you ever learn with boxing. And it's called the jab and the cross. The jab and the cross. I know, I'm like Rocky up here. You guys can say it. Lots of talent. In fact, I knew Pastor Gabe wasn't gonna be here. I thought maybe I could play the Rocky theme song during this section, but no, he'd probably see it later, so we won't do that. But here's the thing. Those first two punches I learned are what we commonly refer to as the 1-2 punch, right? 1-2. And it's called that, and it's defined because it's called the effective or forceful combination of two things. It's seeped into our everyday vocabulary, right? We use that phrase, the 1-2 punch, a lot to describe two things, good or bad, that happen together. You see, I think it's called the 1-2 punch because these punches are basically inseparable. You see, it's the combination of them that makes them so effective. Because if you just learn the jab, if you just learn that one punch, your opponent will always know what to expect. but it's the cross that has the power. So it's the combination of these two punches that make them so effective. These two punches are the foundation. If you don't learn how to do these right, nothing else will work. You will not be competitive. You have to learn the 1-2 punch. So I couldn't help but think about this 1-2 punch and how it relates to the work that we do at World Help, the work that we do together with you. Because see, we believe in help for today and hope for tomorrow. And I believe that those 2 punches have the power to change the world. What we mean by that is that we believe without food, clean water, medicine that our bodies need, well then faith, it means very little. But without faith that feeds our souls, everything else is a short-term fix. It's when you focus on both, body and soul, that true transformation begins. We had a visitor come to World Help that shared with us, and I started thinking about this on a whole new level. His name is Dr. Gary Habermas. He's an American historian, he's a New Testament scholar, he's a philosopher on religion, but he's most famous for his 1985 debate on the resurrection with then atheist Anthony Flew. Gary's also a World Help supporter, and he just happens to be a good friend of my dad's. In fact, the story goes that when my dad was suffering from cancer years ago, he was in the hospital recovering from one of his surgeries. He couldn't even talk because he had a tube down his throat. But Gary came to visit him in the hospital the night before that debate. My dad couldn't talk, so my mom handed him a clipboard with a piece of paper, and my dad just scribbled on it, "Beat Flew." And whenever they get together, they laugh and they reminisce about that. But on this particular day, Gary shared with our team, and I soaked up every word. He shared with us a very familiar passage in Matthew. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, if you're like me, if you spent any time in church growing up, then you're familiar with this verse. We've been taught this verse from a very young age. Love God and love others. This is the basics of our faith, right? But Dr. Habermas told it in a fresh way. He pointed out that these commands we see in Scripture are numbered, and numbered in a way found nowhere else in Scripture. Number 1, love God. Number 2, love others. He told us that Jesus numbers loving God as number 1 and loving your neighbor as number 2, the first and second greatest commandment. Nowhere else do we see in the Gospels a numerical list like this, but here we see number 1 and number 2, God's top 2 priorities. He said, that's higher than all the things we debate, right? All of the politics and the bickering and the things that divide us on Facebook and here in our own church communities. This is so much higher than all of that. And yet, all the time when we're debating all of those things, most of the time we're disregarding God's top priorities of number 1 and number 2. Now, I think it's easy for us to accept number 1, to say that loving God is most important. But say what you will, he puts loving your neighbor as number 2. So I began digging into this a little bit, thinking about it in a whole new way, and started asking myself, how do we really do number 1? How do we really love God with all of our heart, with all of our souls, with all of our minds? How do we do that? And I would like to suggest that the way you do number 1 is by how well you do number 2. You see what I mean? Because can we truly love God without loving others? I think it's easy to get comfortable with number one, to say we love God, we go to church, we read our Bible, we know what we believe, and we can feel good about that. But that's not the whole picture. In the Bible, in the book of John, it says that the world will know that we belong to God by how well we love others. The number two, loving our neighbor, that can feel scary, it's sacrificial, it makes us uncomfortable, but it is how we were truly meant to live. You see, I believe that the true expression of our faith, of our love for God, comes from how well we love others. It's the manifestation of our faith. And I believe that to love others well requires us to love God well. And when we love God well, we will be compelled to charge into the darkness and take that love to other people. Loving God and loving others. Loving others because of our love for God. Number one and number two, and as I like to now say, the 1-2 punch. I was in the Bahamas shortly after Hurricane Dorian hit. We were there taking supplies down that so many World Help supporters like you helped provide. I wasn't prepared for the devastation. We went to the town of Mud where it was literally leveled. I climbed up on top of this big ocean-going containers. Some people think that those containers actually blew in from shore, and that's part of what caused all the devastation, just knocking down everything in its path. As I climbed up there and looked over that town of Mud, it was complete rubble. Bodies were still trapped underneath. I interviewed a family that remarkably had survived. They were so grateful that the three of them were together. They lost everything. I interviewed the little boy. He's about 10 years old, and he bravely tried to tell me that he wasn't scared during the storm, but I knew he was. And I asked him what he missed most, and just like any other 10-year-old boy, he said he missed his toys. But they lost everything. I knew they had lost their homes, but it wasn't until I interviewed them that I realized they lost their home. He has no place to go to school. They've lost their sources of income because their jobs are destroyed. They've lost family members. They lost their entire community. But being there on the ground, meeting people in a time of their greatest need, giving them help for today and hope for tomorrow, that is the 1-2 punch in action. I was in Thailand at Christmas for our annual Christmas outreach programs that we have there. And our work there on the ground, we're working with girls in the sex industry. And this all starts in rural Thailand, where these girls have no education, no skills, but culturally, it is the girl's responsibility to provide for the family. So this pushes her to come to the big city, Bangkok, to look for legitimate work. She gets there because she has no education and no skills. She can't find a job. And then she realizes she has no place to sleep. So she finds herself lured into the bars that tell her they'll give her a safe place. She starts off as a cashier, one thing leads to another, and before she knows it, she's trapped in an industry she never thought she would be in. I've been in these bars. I've seen the girls on stage wearing just a number pinned to them and listened as the customers call out the number as if they're being sold to the highest bidder. But on this night, we charge into the darkness of those bars and we invite the girls to come to these Christmas parties. You see, in order to do that, we have to pay their bar fine, because that's what it costs a customer to take the girl for the night. They first have to pay a fine to the bar. So we pay that so the girl can leave for the night. She comes to a nice ballroom where we have food and games and presents, and most importantly, she gets to hear the gospel presentation in her own language. We went to one bar that night. We divided up into groups, and the bar that I went at, I was overwhelmed watching as we had to negotiate with the bar owner. And finally, I think this next picture you're gonna see is a paper full of numbers. This might not mean anything to you, but it about broke my heart, because these were the girls they were letting come with us that night. No names, numbers. We walked out of that bar, I think, with about 18 girls from that one bar alone. And I wish I could describe to you this street because it's a narrow street in the red light district. You can't escape what's going on in the bars on either side of you. So walking down the street with 18 girls and a few Americans was a sight nobody could ignore. And it was such a literal representation of walking out of the darkness into the light. Guess what the first things that happened when they got to that party? They got a name tag with their name. And in one of those parties one night after the gospel presentation was given, nearly every hand in the room went up. You might not know it, but today is International Women's Day. It's a day when the world focuses on the rights of women or the rights that women don't have in so many parts of the world. And you see, I believe that my responsibility as a woman that does have those rights is to speak up for those who don't have them. Because let me tell you, when you empower a woman, when you allow her to chase her dreams, when you rescue her from the sex industry, and when most importantly, you introduce her to a man who loves her, who will never leave her, abandon her, abuse her, and has a much better plan for her life, that is when true transformation happens. That is help and hope, and that is the 1-2 punch. In Cuba, I met a group of church planners who you help support. And I loved hearing their stories they shared with us the work they were doing. It was heartbreaking to hear the hardships that they go through on a daily basis just to have these ministries. But they didn't want to talk about that. They wanted to talk about the hope and the lives changed. And I remember there was this one man that stood out to me. He was wearing a purple jacket, and underneath of it he had a t-shirt, and I could tell it was one of the shirts that World Help had probably sent in one of our containers of aid. And he talked about how he was working in this rural area that he had been called to, and someone donated a piece of land and he was able to build a small home for the people to gather. But every weekend, about 60 kids came and gathered here with him. He was able to give all of them a Bible because of our work. But I love this part. He said that he had taken some of the sports uniforms that we had sent that were adult sizes, huge uniforms. But he had somebody sew them and cut them down so that he could outfit an entire soccer team wearing matching uniforms. Now, maybe not be a big deal to you guys, but in this part of Cuba, to be able to be on a team where your team had matching uniforms, big deal. And guess what? Now, all the other kids in the surrounding area want to be part of this team and this ministry. And you know what he asked us for? He could have asked for anything. He asked for more Bibles. You see, I love that because there's no greater example of the work that we're doing, all working together, from the humanitarian aid to the church planters to the Bible distribution, and all of that working together is the 1-2 punch. In the early years of World Help, we were working in Russia, and we went to a cancer hospital. I still remember, it's called Cancer Hospital number 62. It was a hard visit for my dad because just years before, he had survived cancer. Now, this was the leading cancer in Russia, leading cancer hospital in Russia at the time. But reality was, this was just a place where people were sent to die. They had nothing. No medicines, no resources, no equipment. If this paints a little picture of what they were dealing with, they were literally using the latex gloves and at night washing them and hanging them up to dry so that they could use them again the next day. On that first visit, my dad met the lead doctor there. His name's Dr. Moxon, and my dad promised him that we would help him. And over the years, we sent 13 ocean-going containers full of aid to that hospital. I was there on one of those visits where some of those supplies were being unloaded, and doctors and staff were literally running out of whatever procedures or surgeries they were doing, ripping the boxes open, grabbing something they needed, and running back in. The doctor pulled me aside on that trip, and he said, "Young lady, I want you to give your dad a message." He said, you are the first Americans to ever keep your promise to us. You fast forward a few years later, after we had sent all those containers, and Dr. Moxon told my dad this. He said, at first, I didn't believe your faith. But now I have seen your faith in action. Now I accept your faith. I mean, come on, is there any better example of the 1-2 punch that when we love others the way God loved us, we earn the right to be heard? You see, it is the combination of those punches that make it so effective. You know what's my favorite thing I learned in all of my boxing research? It's that when you land those punches successfully, when you land the 1-2 punch successfully, that first punch, the jab, it lifts your opponent's head and exposes their chin to the cross. It lifts your opponent's head and exposes their chin to the cross. I don't know if you're tracking with me. But I couldn't ignore that mental image, that illustration, because if we are doing what we are called to do, if we are living out our faith, then we are lifting people's heads. We are lifting their heads out of poverty. We are lifting their heads out of the desperate situations they find themselves in. And we are lifting their heads so they can see the cross, the one true source of hope and transformation in their lives. What's the ultimate victory in a boxing match? The knockout, right? The knockout. And the ultimate victory for us is knocking out the injustices in our world. But you know what I found out? You don't have to be the most powerful puncher. I don't even know if that's a word, puncher. You don't have to be the most powerful puncher to knock someone out. All you have to do is land an accurate shot in the right place. All you have to do is land a shot in the right place. And I would add to that you don't have to be the wealthiest person in the room to make a difference. You don't have to have all the answers to the world's problems to help rescue a life. You don't have to travel the globe yourself and look directly into the eyes of someone to help meet that need. You just have to land a shot in the right place. And I can't help but think that now, right here, this morning, in this room, is a really great place to start. Because when I look out in this room, I see a room full of boxers. A room full of people who have the 1-2 punch down pat. You love God and you love others. And together, we can knock out the injustices of our time. Together, you can knock out the injustices right here in your own community. Because how do you knock out poverty? 1-2. How do you knock out hunger and disease? 1-2. How do you knock out spiritual darkness? 1-2. Slavery and oppression? 1-2. How do you transform villages in Guatemala, Cuba, and Peru? 1-2. And how do you impact nearly 9,000 lives around the world? By loving God and loving people. Help for today, hope for tomorrow. It's your 1-2 punch. Pray with me. God, I'm in awe of what you're allowing the Point to do around the world. And I'm humbled that World Help can be a part of it. I thank you that you allow us to be a part of this kingdom work with you. But God, I know you're not done. Maybe there's someone out there this morning that they like that they go to the point. They like what the point is doing. They like how the point is impacting so many people, but maybe they haven't got involved. They are not all in yet. Maybe today be the day that they make that decision, because this is not just about missions. This is not just choosing to go on a mission trip. This is being all in our faith. This is who we are, what we should be doing. And I just pray as it's such an exciting time here for the point as they're getting ready to move into a new facility, that God, you would bless them, that you would use that new facility to reach so many people, both here and around the world. And God, most importantly, maybe there's someone here today listening that maybe they want to experience this great love of God that we've been talking about, this great love of God that we feel burdened to take to the world. Maybe they haven't experienced that yet today. And may today be the day that you step out in faith and make that next step. God, thank you for the blessings you give us. Thank you for the blessing of being able to share your good news with the world. And thank you for loving us.